So this is just a follow-up video to the Alphabetic Principle Teaching Activities video. I just have a few things I'd like to say about the Alphabetic Principle. First is that the strategies that I have been using come from this book, Teaching Word Recognition. And again, I strongly encourage you to look into purchasing it. It's got some great practical strategies and the research that supports the strategies for teaching word recognition specifically, in addition to the ones that I'm using in these videos. So again, alphabetic principle is the idea that students use their phonemic awareness along with their letter knowledge in order to start making the connection that sounds are associated with letters. And we can blend these sounds together. We can segment words or separate the sounds in words. So it's really kind of just this very discrete step in between phonemic awareness, your understanding of sounds and your hearing of sounds in words, to letter knowledge. But it's a really important one in the process of learning to decode and learning to spell. And the two, decoding and spelling, are really very intertwined. So when you're teaching one, you always want to be reciprocally teaching the other. And the most powerful way to understand the extent to which students are learning the alphabetic principle is to encourage them to use invented spelling. And so this is the process of just hearing sounds and words and then putting down a letter for that sound. So students can be part of their writing sounds, or they can be using like the tiles, the letter tiles, or stamps, or other magnets, or other representations of the letters. And in fact, it's better if they use letters that are already printed that they can manipulate with their hands, rather than the process of writing, because the process of handwriting and forming letters is just an added load, cognitive load, in the process. And so if they don't have to do that as they're learning to piece the letters together to make words, then the better. So you want to give them plenty of practice with putting letters together to form words, and it's best to use tiles or other manipulatives before they actually have to really write and add that other processing piece. So there's an activity called segment to spell, and again, it's building upon the phonemic awareness activity of segmenting. So students would be, you would tell them a word like fat, and then ask them the sounds that they hear in the word fat, and they would segment the sounds, so f, at. And then you would then say, okay, what's the first sound in fat? And then hopefully the student will identify f. And then, okay, what's a letter that goes with the sound f? So then they identify f. And then what's the middle sound in fat? Oh, it's ah. Do you know a letter that goes with the sound ah? And then they choose a. What's the last sound in fat? T. What's a letter that goes with t? Then they choose t. So it's starting to use their understanding of segmenting words into their phonemes and then identifying the letters that go with those sounds. You have to be careful in this process because not all words have easily or common sounds associated with the letters. So like the word love, if the student breaks the word love into its sounds, into its phonemes, l, v, they're likely going to spell it as L-U-V, which is great, and that's part of the invented spelling process. In fact, that's a very common way that kids spell love. in the early grades. But if you're going to be saying, okay, now we're going to be learning how to spell words, then you want to make sure you're choosing words that the sounds the children know are associated with the spelling associated. So, hi James. So, encourage invented spelling. Some students can be pretty resistant to it. I had several students with special needs who were resistant to invented spelling, but it's kind of just a process where you just kind of have to finesse their processes and very much use sounds and letters that they know. If there's one idea, one principle that holds true throughout all of pedagogy, all of good teaching education, it's that you start with what students know. You build upon what they can do, build upon their strengths. And so even if they only can identify 6 letters out of the alphabet, if they know those letters, then you start there with the sounds, common sounds associated. And then you might teach a new letter and sound just one at a time, but you always keep that core of sounds and letters that they know to build the words. Students can begin to decode words even before knowing all of the letters and sounds. Don't let that hold you back for teaching students these processes, these beginning decoding processes. You can always, have them in those heterogeneous groupings in their general education classroom. You can encourage that. But you just start with what they know. There may be kids, this book talks about pocket children, and the way they describe it is, classroom teachers may have students in these ability groups, and say that you have a student who's lower than everybody else in his group, and he's in the lowest group, to use that term in terms of progression of ability. What the teacher can do is stick in a few extra tiles of maybe a letter or a sound that the student is learning for that day or that week or whatever the case may be, and provide, stick it in your pocket, provide that student with some extra practice rounds of the activities like I've done, the videos you've just watched. So the teacher can provide these just throughout the day, like, standing in line for recess or during math or just other times. Or it doesn't have to be the classroom teacher. It can be a special ed teacher, school psychologist, interventionist, where the student is getting more practice repetitions throughout the day than he otherwise would just in the small group instruction. All right, so I guess another piece I'd like to point out is just on James, and just be mindful that although he's my demonstration helper for these activities, he doesn't quite fit the profile of kids that you would be working with. First of all, he's not school age. He's preschool age. Second of all, at this point in time, does not have an identified learning disability. Kids with learning disabilities will most likely struggle with a lot of these processes. So as I've mentioned before, blending words can be a source of difficulty. So that's the process where they may be able to identify the various sounds in the words, like fish, f, sh, but then blending it together to make a word, they might say fit or ship. So there are discrete processes that can be difficult for kiddos with learning disabilities, because there's a lot going on when you're learning to read, and those of us who've learned, we kind of forget all those processes that are involved. So yeah, that's just a word on that. Just keep that in mind. It's also totally out of context or at home on a bed, on the floor, rather than in a school setting with, lots of kids around and all of that. So just keep that in mind as you're watching these videos, and but hopefully the takeaway is what these activities look like in general. So thanks a lot.